All right. Well, welcome everyone, and thanks for tuning in. I've got a very, very special guest with me today. He's the Chicago Bulls beat writer, and he's been covering the Bulls for over 20 years and 29 years in total with the Chicago Tribune. It is my pleasure to introduce to you Casey Johnson of NBC Sports Chicago. Casey, thanks for being on the show, man.
Oh, thanks for having me. Appreciate it, man.
So Casey, first and foremost, really, I already kind of said this before we started recording, but can't thank you enough for taking the time out of your day to be on the show. And of course, all of your great work covering the Bulls all these years. I always kind of liken you to the Bulls' very own Adrian Wojnarowski. Whenever there's Bulls rumors or reports that are coming out, I kind of generally go right to you, to your Twitter account to see, if these rumors are actually real and incredible or whatnot. So, growing up, I kind of always, this was like a sort of a dream job for me is, being able to cover the Bulls. And I'm sure it comes with its challenges, of course, but interacting with the players and coaches, talking and writing about basketball. I'm curious to know what got you into this field and how'd you end up becoming a Bulls insider?
Yeah, well, I think like a lot of people, I had a strong love of sports and also a strong love of writing. I identified that at an early age. I'm kind of lame and boring because in my high school yearbook at Evanston Township High School, I actually said I wanted to be the Bulls beat writer for the Chicago Tribune.
There you
And
go.
what do you know? I did that for a long time, and now I'm very fortunate to be working for NBC Sports Chicago. So, yeah, I mean, I just always loved writing, and I always loved being around sports. I played sports, through college, and just realized I wasn't going to max it out past my D3 college basketball career. So figured
Hey, at least you got it that far. When I was a kid, I thought I was actually going to the NBA. Like I legitimately thought that, and I think around age 11 or so, I realized, yeah, I'm not gonna be able to make this. I still played through high school and things like that, but after that, I was like, yeah, I'm not good enough to go any further than that. So that's cool that you made the D3 though.
Yeah, I maxed it out. Played D3 at Beloit College in Wisconsin, and then started working for the Tribune shortly thereafter. So just very fortunate to have been around the NBA for as long as I have, because it's the best sport in the league in my humble opinion.
Absolutely. No, I've been following NBA for years and I love it, which is why I created this YouTube channel. So I have to ask though, being an insider and, not just you, but other beat writers as well, how do you guys go about sifting through your sources and determining what is fact from fiction? The reason I ask that is because in the sports media world, there are always so many rumors that go around. And for my channel personally, I try to separate the truth from speculation. So would love any advice that you have on that.
Well, I think part of that just comes with experience. And also, I mean, that's a hard question for someone like myself to answer, just in the sense that I've seen the business change so much in the 30 years I've been in it. Rumors back in the day, you could just kind of take your time to suss out and make several calls on it, and then decide what you wanted to print in the newspaper that had one deadline at night. And now you're literally on deadline with Twitter and social media 24/7. So you probably have a little bit less time. And I actually feel fortunate to have come up in the era that I did, because I think back then I was probably a little bit more, I don't want to say reckless, because, I wasn't, but I would definitely probably run with things that didn't have as much backbone to them, maybe as I do in this day and age. And I was able to do that. If I had Twitter, I can only imagine how much damage I might have. So I think that just comes with experience, and just trusting the people that you talk to. There's no single answer to that question. It really does come down to your contacts and your relationships. And also the other thing, and we were talking about this a little bit offline, you and I, is, or actually you mentioned I'm the Adrian Wojnarowski of the Bulls, which is not accurate, because he breaks most Bulls stories, and that's really what it comes down to. Is in this day and age, most national writers in all sports. I'm not just talking about the NBA. Jeff Passan, for MLB, and there's so many great reporters out there. That's typically what happens: is the national people break the bigger stories, and the beat people confirm it, and then try to add a little bit more context through your reporting and your sources.
Sure. So, kind of going along that route, what's been the biggest difference for you in your interactions and working with and meeting with the new front office versus the old one, in Gar Forman, John Paxson? I always call him Gar Pax, and everyone does. But obviously very different, in terms of their approach when they're, responding to questions in the media. What's sort of been the biggest difference for you?
Well, you obviously can't answer that without getting into COVID. I mean,
Right.
I've actually talked to
That's
Arturas. I've actually talked to Arturas Karnisovas since he's been hired by the Bulls in a gym, one-on-one once, and it was for 5 minutes at the draft combine, and it was all off the record and just FaceTime. I mean, think
Sure.
about that. So, in a normal world, non-COVID world, he would have been hired, and we would have spent an entire season getting to know each other in casual settings. Not only myself, but the other beat writers. You just have so much more casual FaceTime, and that's how relationships are built and trust is built, is just
Sure.
those interactions. Every interaction we've had with either Arturas Karnisovas, Mark Eversley, or Billy Donovan, for that matter, has been via Zoom. So, that's
Right.
not, you can't develop relationships that way. I'm not complaining. There are far greater, injustices in the world of COVID
Sure.
than media access, but it's just not how you develop relationships. So, I found them to be professional. It does, Arturas is a pretty close to the vest guy, and that was his reputation coming in. I was
Yeah.
fortunate with him. I was fortunate to having met him once when he worked for the Nuggets in a very atypical situation.
Oh, okay.
I was over in Spain covering the World Cup in 2014. Derrick Rose was on that team coming back from his meniscus tear, and Tom Thibodeau was the assistant coach. And Tom and Arturas have a good relationship. So Tom introduced me to Arturas in Barcelona. So that's a pretty memorable first meeting. So I did have a little bit of background, small background with Arturas. And I look forward to getting to know them once we get back into gyms. The last thing I would say, and hopefully I'm not being too long-winded here,
No,
is
you're good.
the other the other wrinkle to this whole equation is, I've known John Paxson since he was a player, so it was an interesting relationship for me because I knew him as a player, into a broadcaster, into a GM. When he was the radio broadcaster, this was back when beat writers would sit at the scores table. I sat next to John 82 games for like 3 straight seasons. Our elbows would touch. He'd be doing the radio broadcast with Neil Funk, and I'd be typing on my laptop for the Chicago Tribune. So I knew John incredibly well, even before he got the GM job. And then your relationship changes a little bit when you cover him as GM. You have some moments where, he's unhappy with things you write or report or what have you. So I just knew John so closely in a different realm before he became an executive.
Got it. So, obviously with Arturas, I feel like they're, like you were kind of saying, they keep things to their chest and they kind of like to keep things under wraps. I was personally shocked by the Vucevic trade when it was made. Obviously, I was very happy about it, and I think that the Bulls ultimately did win that trade. We can talk about that in a little bit too. But I feel that a lot of Bulls fans didn't see that coming. As a Bulls insider, generally speaking, has it been more challenging to get information and details in what the front office is doing because they like to keep things under wraps? Or I guess, was that always the case with Garpax anyway as well?
It was that way with them too, but just I knew them so much better, so that if I heard stuff around the league, I could.
You felt okay just reaching out to them.
Yeah, well, also you just run into them in the gym, so you can just run things past them. I mean, so this is all kind of wrapped up together. That said, I mean, for years I've kind of worked under my personal way of mode of operation is, I feel fortunate to have covered the league for as long as I have, so I know people from other organizations as well. So I typically try to work from outside the organization inward, and I only bother people inward if it gets to a level where, I need to run something past them, So I typically try to find stuff out, throughout the league, just in my conversations with people throughout the league. It's not like I'm calling up like, Arturas or Mark on a daily basis, go, hey, what are you guys up to? Because they're just not going to play that game, and that's their right, So
yeah, of course.
But
were you?
Yeah, the last thing I'll say is, bottom line is, I'm looking forward to the day we get back into the gym for casual FaceTime,
where you can actually build like a real relationship and a bond with someone. No, for sure.
Yeah.
Were you surprised by the Vucevic trade? Well, I guess I should say I remember when it happened, and I remember you tweeting about it, and you were saying, I was surprised that the Bulls actually traded 2 first-round picks. Would not have expected that. were you surprised by it? And then, in your view, do you think that it was still worth it? The 2 first-round picks, especially since we didn't end up getting to keep that first pick, since it didn't fall into the top 4. Do you think that in the long run, this will benefit the Bulls?
So to answer your first question, I was very surprised by the trade. And, I'm just used to working with covering a front office that treated first round picks like gold, so
Right.
that was a departure, and that, but look, I've said this many times, I've written it, that's the price you pay for an all-star. You can call Vucevic, maybe he's not a Kevin Durant level all-star, but he's an all-star. He's a 2-time all-star. He's really damn good. So in order to get an all-star, you need to trade draft capital. Yep. I don't know, maybe you could have tried to argue only 1 first-round pick and the salary relief that Otto Porter Jr.'s contract provided. I don't know. I wasn't privy to the negotiations until after the fact. As far as, the trade, I personally think it's too early, and I'm not trying to evade the question. It's just, early returns are not good. I mean, they didn't make the playoffs, and I focused less on, them losing the pick this year. Everyone got so hung up on that. If they kept the pick, and yes, this is a good draft, and it was a top 4 pick, that would have been a good player. There's no question about that. But then you just would have kicked the can down the road. I mean, you would have to do the pick next year. Maybe it's not as good of a draft. I don't know. But, I personally will feel better answering that question once I see a full season of Zach and Vooch together, with obviously whatever changes, roster changes the management brings this offseason.
Yeah. I get a lot of charged comments about this trade on my channel, and I think that's sort of been my answer too. Is it's too early to really say who's won this trade. Next season is going to be a big season for the Bulls, because that'll really determine who actually ultimately netted out with the better option in the trade. I think the trade really worked for both sides, right? When you look at the Orlando Magic and what they were trying to do, they're going into full rebuild mode. They were able to get a young player in Wendell Carter. They were able to get 2 first-round draft picks. And they were able to get value for their all-star big man. So I think it worked for both sides. The Bulls obviously really had to maximize Zach LaVine's prime, and making sure that they're really trying to build around him to keep him engaged and just interested in the team. And so this next year is going to be very important, right? That's kind of leading to my next question is, as we go into next season and we talk about this offseason, do you think that if the Bulls have another disappointing year, let's say they miss the playoffs, are they at risk of losing Zach LaVine since he'll be a free agent next year?
Yes. I mean,
yes.
I mean, Zach has made it very clear that he's tired of losing and he wants to win. And here's the other thing I would say is, so he's around an Olympic team that obviously is a good chance to win a gold medal in Tokyo. He's going to experience winning and playing again with the elite for the second time in a short setting, in terms of the All-Star game, which is obviously just an exhibition. And then on the USA Basketball, he's around the game's elite now. He feels he is one of the game's elite, and he's tired of losing. Now, all that said, I don't want to be alarmist. He is very committed to the Bulls. He's very happy with Billy Donovan's hire. He loves living in Chicago. He loves being the face of this franchise. I know these things 100% to be true. I have a strong working relationship with Zach. But to answer your question, yes, if they miss the playoffs next year, after you trade for another All-Star, Nikola Vucevic, and have a whole offseason to make the roster, you're darn right you're going to be in danger of losing him. So this is a very important season on a lot of levels, and that would be one of the biggest.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. I mean, that's one of the biggest concerns, right, as a Bulls fan is what if they come up short and LaVine leaves, and now you have Vucevic, who will then be on an expiring contract going into the following season. It's like, where do you start from there? You kind of go into another rebuild, and then you also don't really have the draft capital that you otherwise would have. As far as, this past season, obviously a disappointing season for the Bulls, but there were a lot of circumstances that, came about. You had a trade deadline, and you had a bunch of players coming in that really weren't able to get a lot of practice time together, that weren't really able to get familiar with each other, a compressed schedule that didn't allow, a lot of traveling. And then Zach LaVine obviously had to go into the health and safety protocol. But in your view, what was the biggest issue with this Bulls team that really kept them from achieving their true potential, or I guess at least the expectations that we thought would have happened after the trade deadline was made?
Well, I think Billy and Arturas both kind of nailed it in their end of season press conferences. I mean, they just gave away too many winnable games with really kind of just inexcusable stuff, whether it be, late game fouling or inability to get to the free throw line or turnovers at crucial times. I mean, that was a big part of it. But I agree with your overall assessment. It was just a clunky season and for all teams, but really in a lot of ways for the Bulls most acutely with the early health and safety protocols. And then I think I will say, including myself, all of us underestimated how much that trade also disrupted things in an already very chaotic and disruptive season. Now that's not a check in the ledger of don't make the trade. But the point, I mean, if you want to go acquire an all-star, you go do it, right? But my point is, once that happened, it was a lot, and you saw that, especially with the way they played. Obviously, right out of the deadline, they were facing tough competition, but they just were not good right then. And then they got better. And it's my personal belief, and this isn't really any great revelation, and it's whatever, because it would only been the play-in tournament. But I do think if Zach doesn't land in those health and safety protocols, they probably snag the 9th or 10th seed. That's just my personal feeling. I'm not saying I'm right. But to answer your question, they just had too many lapses at crucial times in really inexcusable situations. And there's some big picture things they really need to work on. They need to get to the free throw line more. They need to foul less. They need to turn it over less. Basic fundamental basketball things, right? But those are, I know, areas that Arturas and Billy have pointed to, and I think that those are really, really areas that they need to improve.
Yeah, no, and it's, that was going to be my next question was, do you think that if LaVine hadn't gone into the health and safety protocol that they would have actually made it? And I think they probably would have squeaked into a play-in tournament. But even then, it's still disappointing because you obviously want to actually start making strides in the right direction. I will say, though, that once LaVine did come back, once he was cleared to rejoin the team, they looked pretty good. Right. I mean, at least of those few games, and then the last couple games, obviously they sat folks because they realized they weren't going to be making the playoffs. And I started thinking about, and a lot of people have been asking me about this, and I don't think it's that great of a comparison, but I started thinking about the Phoenix Suns of last year, where in the bubble, they were on fire. They were undefeated throughout the bubble. And then obviously they took that momentum going into the following season. Do you see any potential similarities in terms of what the Phoenix Suns of last year had? Given the fact that they've got a great shooting guard in Devin Booker, they've got a good big man in DeAndre Ayton, and you got the Bulls with Zach LaVine and Nikola Vucevic. Kind of what they need now is that point guard. Do you think that with a full off season, with a summer camp for Patrick Williams, a full training camp, a full preseason, hopefully limited, health and safety protocol measures, do you think that the Bulls will hopefully ride that momentum going into next season? And then what is sort of your expectation for next season? Aside from making the playoffs, I think that's a given, but how many wins, how do you actually see them finishing in the seeding and things like that?
Well, are they adding Chris Paul this offseason?
Well, they're not going to get Chris Paul. I think we could all agree Chris Paul is likely going to, he's probably going to decline his player option. He's probably going to restructure it for a more lucrative long-term deal, and he's just going to stay with the Phoenix Suns. But and that leads to my next question is hopefully, they're going to get some sort of point guard that has that ability to really give him that playmaking, that defense, that veteran leadership. So I guess, obviously it's dependent on that. But let's say that they do bring in someone. What are sort of your expectations going into next season?
Yeah, and I will say, it became kind of fun for people to poke fun at the bubble, because I wrote a lot about the Suns in the bubble, especially because Cameron Payne was balling out.
Right.
But that stuff, maybe I'm sappy or naive or dumb, but I that stuff's important, man. And yes, they added Chris Paul, and that's the biggest reason why they are where they are. But that you can't overlook what they did in the bubble. So I'm completely on board. It sounded like your question was kind of tilting this way. I wrote a couple of things, and some people clapped back at me a little bit, like, "Oh, it's stupid. It's a bubble." No, if the Bulls were in the bubble, that would have been a good experience for them. And
absolutely,
I'm not saying you never know like how things are now. Maybe Wendell Carter like has an incredible bubble and then he's still on the team this year. I don't, you never know. So I do think there's something to that momentum. And again, obviously Chris Paul is the biggest factor in this. But all that said, again, I'm not trying to evade the question. I need to see what the roster is before I place expectations. That said, when you make the trade for Nikola Vucevic, obviously you need to win, and you don't need to be competing for play-in. You need to be competing for either home court or definitely top 6. To me, top 6 is the cutoff. If you finish below top 6 in the East next year, especially given all the potential roster changes you have available this offseason, it's a failure. It's as simple as that, because you have identified your core now as, Vucevic, LaVine, Williams, and White. And obviously the White injury is a minor setback. That's disappointing. But you've got the other 3 that should just be ready to ball out. And you've got potential to add some really nice pieces this offseason. So to me, as far as my personal expectations, it's got to be top 6, or then I'll start going back to the other question about the Vucevic trade. Then I'll start questioning, was that the right move? I mean, how what's this team's ceiling with Zach LaVine and Nikola Vucevic moving forward?
Yeah. And so, kind of going along those lines of what the roster would look like, let's talk about, point guard and options real quick. I also do want to be mindful of your time so we can, but
I'm good, man.
Okay. Now, going in this upcoming offseason and knowing that there are a lot of point guard options available, you've got, Mike Conley, you've got Kyle Lowry, obviously Chris Paul. We don't know whether or not he's going to decline his player option, but it's still out there. In my view, and I've talked about this a lot on my channel, and I'm kind of the minority opinion in this, and but I wanted to get your thoughts on it. Does it make sense? And I think it makes a ton of sense to try and make a trade for Ben Simmons. And, especially given the Bulls' needs when it comes to elite defense, perimeter defense specifically. He's an incredible playmaker. Obviously, he has his flaws, and he's on a massive, massive contract. But in my view, if you're able to make a trade for Ben Simmons and you're still able to keep Zach LaVine, because that you can only make that trade work if you're able to maintain Zach LaVine, does it make sense for the Bulls? And does it actually move the needle for them to where they would, as you said, at least finish the top 6?
Well, to me, again, I hate to be bad podcasting here, but to me, your whole theory is flawed right from the jump, because you say Ben Simmons absolutely fits the Bulls as long as Zach LaVine is on the Bulls.
Yeah,
you are not getting Ben Simmons without trading Zach LaVine. And end of story.
You don't think so?
What other? You have no draft capital. They're going to ask for Zach LaVine. You have an all-star, 3-time all-star, perennial all defensive player of the year. They are absolutely asking for Zach LaVine. So
here's my
what's your trade package without Zach LaVine? I want to hear this one.
So I think that because Ben Simmons' trade value is at an all-time low. Now, it might not be as low as some people think. They're going to start, fielding offers, and they might start rejecting people. And then I think, there's a rumor that the Pacers had offered Malcolm Brogdon and a first-round pick, and the Sixers said no. I think that they're probably viewing his trade value a bit higher than the league is maybe viewing it. And so more and more people are going to start making offers. They're going to be like, that's not good enough for Ben Simmons. And then they're going to get to a point where, well, crap, we still haven't found a good trade partner, and the season is about to start, and we can't have Ben Simmons on this team. And so in my view, you're probably going to think it's ridiculous now. In my view, if you were to do something like a sign and trade for Lauri Markkanen, you include Coby White into that, you throw in, maybe a couple second-round picks, you probably would have to include Patrick Williams in there, although I really wouldn't want to trade Patrick Williams in that as a result. I think that that's something that could potentially get it done. Now, the only reason I say that is because the Sixers need shooting. They need shooting badly. And obviously Markkanen has been inconsistent, but he was shooting 40% from 3 this year. Obviously he needs a change of scenery. I think that would be a huge come up for them. They also get a young point guard in Coby White, who is a bit of a wild card, but he has shown potential. And obviously he can shoot too. Still inconsistent to an extent. And if you were to throw in Patrick Williams, which again, like I said, I really don't want to include Patrick Williams into that, but that's another young up and coming prospect. I don't know. I think right now, obviously it wouldn't work because I think that they're expecting a lot for Ben Simmons in return. But if it gets to a point where they're just not able to really get what they're expecting, and then they get this kind of offer, and it's like, we might have to jump on this. So that's sort of my perspective on it. I think it could potentially work, but I just think that Ben Simmons makes a lot of sense for this Bulls team. I know that people are saying, oh, he's a liability on offense. He's a liability in the fourth quarter. You can't keep him in late in games. Sure, but I think if you were to have Zach LaVine and Nikola Vucevic around him, the burden, or I guess, the pressure of being also an offensive player goes away. If he solely focuses just on making sure that he's getting those guys the right opportunities, and obviously he focuses on defense, which the Bulls need, that'll be a huge, change for him in his career, and I think a benefit to his career. Anyway, that's sort of my trade package. I'm sure you're probably going to, that's not going to work at all. The Sixers, no way are they going to be able to take that. But
no, I mean, that one actually isn't like instantly dismissible. So it is intriguing. But I do think they're going to ask. I mean, again, they're going to ask for Zach LaVine. But let's say that let's play along with your theory of that they start lowering their demands and that package on the table. First of all, Patrick Williams would absolutely be included in that deal. So it would be a sign and trade Lauri, Markkanen, Patrick Williams, and Coby White, and then whatever else needs to make it work. That one isn't instantly dismissible to me, because I agree with you that the one common ground we have here is that Ben Simmons with Zach LaVine and Nikola Vucevic absolutely works for me.
Yeah,
and I'm not as down on Ben Simmons as some people are, because the dude is, to me, arguably the top 1, 2, 3 defensive player in the league.
Absolutely.
I mean, and even like if you look at that last series, even in like when he was melting down offensively in that final game, he was still like completely wreaking defensive havoc. In the final minute, he was like just guarding guys, blowing up screens and tipping balls and things like that. So he's a very special player in a lot of ways. Obviously, I think he would benefit from a change of scenery. I just personally think if he is traded, all stars will be involved. And the Bulls,
I mean, if it's Zach LaVine,
if
it's Zach LaVine, in my view, then it's not worth it.
I agree.
Then it's not worth making the trade for Ben Simmons, because you're still taking on a lot of risk for Simmons.
For sure.
You're taking on a very large contract. You're taking on a guy that is still not a good jump shooter and probably not going to be a great scorer. And he's, so if it includes Zach LaVine, it's not worth it.
I may be in the minority here. I personally believe Zach LaVine has more value and right now in the NBA than
I agree.
Than Ben Simmons.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think with how efficient Zach was this year,
and he just keeps getting better. People keep discounting. I know he's been in the league a long time. I don't think he's reached his ceiling. It's been pretty well documented in some columns I've written for NBC Sports Chicago that I'm a pretty big Zach believer. I don't think he's. I know he's been in the league a long time. I know he's lost a lot. I think there's still room for this dude to go, because if you look at it, he's just hitting his first All-Star game. He's just making his first Olympics. He's improved so much over the last 2 seasons. The work ethic is there. The commitment to winning is there. I think you're going to see him go to even another level. So we'll see.
Yeah, hopefully. So let's talk about realistic options for the Bulls as it comes to a point guard, because Ben Simmons might be a little bit of a pie in the sky, unless of course you include Zach LaVine, which in my view is not worth it if we were to trade him. But let's talk about some of these, you agents that are going to be on the board coming in this offseason. Like I said, Kyle Lauri, Mike Conley, Chris Paul, there's Lonzo Ball as a restricted free agent. Spencer Dinwiddie just declined his player option. What's a realistic target you think for the Bulls that they could get? Because I think a lot of people, we talk about these guys, but Mike Conley, Kyle Lauri, older, likely going to want still pretty hefty paydays that the Bulls just don't really have the salary cap for. Chris Paul is likely going to stay in Phoenix. Lonzo Ball is a good option, but he is probably going to want a lot of money, and he's restricted, so you don't know if the Pelicans are going to match. So in your view, what do you think is the most realistic option for the Bulls?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I'd be guessing like everybody else, but I'll just answer that kind of in theory first, and then get into some specifics. I
Sure.
personally think that the ideal scenario obviously would be kind of a sign and traded Lauri for some target, whether it be Lonzo or Spencer Dinwiddie or something like that. I mean, that's probably the ideal scenario. Um, I also think of in lieu of that, I do think the Bulls are going to operate as an over the cap team and use exceptions to sign guys. I just
Sure.
think they have to do too much work and jettison too many players to be a team with functional cap space to pursue one of those big name guys. So I think one of those big name guys are. So I personally think I'm going to be personally focused on the trade market first, whether it's a sign and trade situation or another name, that I think is potentially gettable in terms of the trade market that I've thrown out there is Jalen Brunson.
Yeah.
Maybe a guy who doesn't completely move the needle, but I think fits this team like a glove. Really solid player. I think has the potential to grow in a more featured role. And a guy who can shoot, facilitate, just knows how to run the team, is a winner, that kind of thing. So that'd be another scenario I'd keep an eye on. And then, there's some gettable exception free agent target guys that aren't going to move the needle, but we've thrown out on our podcast, like TJ McConnell would be one.
Right.
You can never put to bed the Derrick Rose comes home story until you see where he goes. I think that has small possibility. I do think, the Knicks are probably the front runner there, but so those are some specific names, but in terms of theory, I don't think they're going to be jettisoning all the moves that they would have to do to chase like a Conley or a Lauri or something like that.
Sure. Yeah. No, it makes sense. How do you think Coby White feels about all this? Because obviously, like the talk of any Bulls podcast, the talk of anybody who's following the Bulls right now is it's always, well, we need to upgrade the point guard position. How do you think that he feels about, knowing that we're still trying to look for a point guard that makes sense and that fits this roster? Because I do think that, towards the end of the season, once he was reinserted back into the starting lineup, he actually looked good as far as, running the floor. He was slowing this game down a little bit, taking smarter shots. He was doing a little bit of playmaking. He was only in his second season, going into his third season. I mean, there's still potential for him to be that starting point guard for the Bulls. Now, granted, the injury, obviously that's a pretty big setback, and hopefully he recovers okay. But how do you think he feels about all this?
Well, I couldn't agree with you more about how well he looked down the stretch. And I thought, this is well documented, but I think he benefited from the Vucevic trade as much as anybody because it allowed him to kind of play on the strong side more and be in more catch and shoot situations. And his decision making was limited. But I do agree it's weird because like I've been probably one of the loudest voices of Kobe's not a point guard from the jump. And it always sounds like you're being critical of Kobe. The dude's a good player, man. So like I always want to make clear, like I'm not being critical of him. He's to me, he's a foundational piece. I mean, obviously he's not a untouchable piece, but to me, he's a foundational piece. And here's another reason why he's got a lot of similarities to Zach in the sense that like he's a worker and he looks inward. He does not point the finger elsewhere. He's like, all right, I got to work harder. So and that dovetails into your other question. He hears it and he knows it and he sees it, but he's got a lot of confidence and a lot of belief in himself and a lot of a very strong work ethic. So regardless of what they do, he's still going to be a big part moving forward. And that's why I don't see them going big money long-term in this situation because they've got him growing still into that role. But I do think they're going to bring in somebody to help facilitate the offense. They just have to. They just have to.
What's sort of the latest status on him? Do you have any information on that as far as, I'm sure is it going as planned, his recovery?
Yeah, I mean, I just heard a couple things, but I would just say the bigger issue is because I reported it hard when it initially happened, and my initial reporting was the 4 month. People were focused on 4 months, but the Bulls were very clever in their release. That's when it'll be reevaluated. So it ain't gonna be 4 months. To me, it's gonna be probably closer to 6 months. But again, recoveries chart their own course, and I without being cliche, I will say the dude will put the work in every day in rehab to get back as fast as possible. I have a lot of respect for that kid's work ethic and ability to look inward. He does not cast the blame. I've always been attracted to players like that, and he's definitely one of those type of players.
Sure, absolutely. Just one more question as it relates to the players and this offseason and what they're doing. Have you been following a lot of Patrick Williams and Zach LaVine, working out for Team USA? It sounds like it's been a great experience for them thus far. How do you think that'll overall impact their learning and development going into this upcoming season, especially Patrick Williams, just given the fact that, he's still young, only 19 years old?
Yeah. So we talked to Pat on a Zoom call earlier this week, and then we're fortunate to be doing the same with Zach later today.
Oh, nice.
So I said this on our own Bulls Talk podcast. You cannot, this is another thing where I get like probably sappy and out over my skis, but like you cannot overstate the importance of this, man. They're around the best players in the world on a daily basis. Patrick Williams is guarding them and practicing against them on a daily basis. He is around greatness and the best of their craft, and seeing how hard those guys are still practicing and how hard Coach Popovich and Steve Kerr and Lloyd Pierce and the coaching staff are pushing them on a daily basis. And Patrick used a word that to me says a lot. I'm a sponge. So he's soaking all this experience up. And then as far as how it relates to Zach, this is part of that ascension that I'm talking about. Zach has mentally believed he belongs here for a couple of years. And now the rest of the world's just kind of catching up to it. Okay, yeah, he's an all-star. Yeah, he's an Olympian. And you can nitpick, okay, he got in because James Harden pulled out or what have you. Who cares? He's on the team, man.
He's on the team,
He's going to Tokyo, and he's playing alongside Damian Lillard and Bradley Beal and Kevin Durant and on and on and on a daily basis, man. Yeah. So all this does is help cement his mindset. I could go on and on about this topic. I don't get fired up about sports topics very often, but I've covered 2 Olympics, man. There's something special about this environment and USA basketball, and the fact these guys are around it on a daily basis is huge for the Bulls organization, for my estimation.
Do you think they'll be doing any recruiting and trying to get guys to, hey, you should probably come over to the Bulls? We got a good thing going on here.
That stuff happens all the time, and that can be a nice little byproduct. But the flip side of that is, they can also be saying, hey, why don't you come over to the Nets?
True. Good point. Hopefully that's not the case. I'll ask one last question, because I've always been curious about this. Out of all of your years reporting for the Bulls, well, a couple things. What has been the best experience for you? Or what has been the most memorable experience that you've had? And has there been anybody that you've ever been like kind of starstruck by in terms of when you met them? Yeah, I can't remember if Michael Jordan was probably maybe before you started covering the Bulls, but like, were there any players that you were starstruck by? And then obviously, what was your most fun moment being a reporter for the Bulls?
So I covered the second three-peat, but I was not the lead beat writer then. So to answer your question, my first big break at the Tribune was in 1996. There was this little thing called the internet coming into existence to show my age. And that team was so popular that they needed somebody to cover the team for the internet. And to show how much things have changed over the years, I didn't feel validated unless I saw my name in print. So I would always be pitching stories to the newspaper while still writing for this thing called the World Wide Web. Anyway, I'm babbling, but I was 29 at the time and covering Michael Jordan and that team full of rock stars. And obviously I felt comfortable in the environment. But to answer your question, there were definitely moments where I'd be, asking Michael Jordan a post-game question in a nationally televised press conference where I wasn't starstruck, but I would be like, kind of having an out-of-body experience, like, oh my God, I'm asking like the most famous athlete in the world this question.
Yeah.
He was always great because it was early in my career and it was my first big break and it was a big experience. So I wasn't starstruck, but I was cognizant. It would be a better phrase it. So that answers that question. And then in terms of the other one, are you talking about like my favorite story ever or favorite experience?
Just I guess either. I mean, a memorable moment or like a time period that you really, really enjoyed covering the Bulls, like whether it's like D-Rose era or there was something specific like a game.
All right. Well, because I could go a lot of different ways. Obviously, I've been doing this a long time. But I mean, real quick, big picture. I mean, I've covered a lot of incredible moments. I was there for, Jordan's pose in '98 in Utah. Like I said, I've covered 2 Olympics. So I've been fortunate to have a lot of memorable moments in my career. But just in terms of general vibe, 2 seasons I always say stand out. One would be the 10-11 season, just because, that team was, it was so good. And what I always say is it was so undiscovered for so long. The national media didn't really catch up to that story until like March or April. So you felt like you had this like dominant team and awesome story to yourself. Top first season, Derek rising to MVP status, Joakim always so fun to be around. I had a good relationship with Luol Deng. So Scalabrini was great. Booz. I mean, just so many great interviews on that team. So that was definitely one. But I always say my favorites, if you had asked me to pick one favorite season of all my years doing this, I've always said it's a surprising one. It's the 04-05 season because
interesting. So
I covered the second three-peat, but I wasn't the lead beat writer, but I was around greatness. Then I covered a bunch of, CRAP. Can you swear on this crap? Or, I mean, fine. Some really, really bad teams. And then 04-05, that team started 0-9. Everyone thought they're going to be terrible again. And then just out of nowhere, this team of young, they were called the Try-Hard Bulls, just like overachieves. I was a lot younger then, so I was a little closer to age of the players than I am now and covering them. So I was really tight with like Heinrich and Gordon, Deng, Nocioni, Duhan. I had great relationships with all those guys. Scott Skiles was absolutely fantastic to cover. Hilarious combination of like blunt honesty, humor, sarcasm, would rip players publicly. It was like it was a beat writer's dream. So I would say that 04-05 season was my favorite. And also I was a lot younger in my career then. I didn't have kids, so I just like lived the job 24/7. I mean, now I got kids and I still work hard and take it very seriously, but just your priorities.
It's different. Yeah.
So 04-05, I love catching up with those guys and I always have a soft spot in my heart for that team.
Interesting. I would not have expected that. I mean, I loved that season. I was pretty young. I was in high school at the time, but I went from watching the Dynasty when I was a kid, and that's just what I was used to. I was used to seeing the Bulls just dominate, and then they were really, really bad. After the team Dynasty team dismantled, and then that was the one year where I was like, this is an exciting team again. But I agree with you on the 10-11 season. I think that was a shock because they were, I think, the 8th seed the prior year.
Yep.
And they just turned into one of the best teams in the league. They were a title contender. They finished with the best record in the league. So no, that's great. I love hearing like your experiences because you've just been doing this for so long and reporting for them for so long. So Casey, I cannot thank you enough. I really do appreciate the time. And hopefully the season goes well. Would love to stay in touch with you as well, and we can see how the Bulls are doing. And I really appreciate the time. I really do.
Oh, it was my pleasure. And let's do it again sometime. No problem.
For sure. All right. Thanks, Casey.
All right.